morning, folks. This is your Peachy update for the 13th. Well, they voted it out of the Judiciary Committee, so now it goes to the House floor. Probably next week. And I do expect that it will pass, although it's possible not. There is the possibility that there are enough House Democrats who are worried about the impact that it would go down in the House. But my expectation remains it goes to the Senate, although my odds are down from nearly 100% of it passing the House to about 75. And that's just because the way in which this was done, I continue to believe that Pelosi's clowned it on purpose. And if I was in the shoes of some of the people in her caucus, I'd be real worried about that. So we'll see. Now, I want to talk about something else. There's a lot of screaming about the trade deal and, all of this. The market says, oh, well, that's so fast after ramping overnight. And then again this morning, and then, well, maybe not. And, down a little, up a little. It's pretty close to flat right now, which is not a surprise. I will say this. The fact that nobody is paying attention to the essence of what's going on here, which is that the federal government has been emitting bonds like crazy, and the Federal Reserve has essentially been sucking them all up with their repo operations, ought to alarm everybody. Because what that basically says is that the banks, the primary dealers, who are the ones who are obligated to bid at Treasury auctions, have levered themselves up to such a degree that they are now having problems meeting funding requirements on their own. And this is a very big issue because this is what happens when you have ultra low rates, okay? Remember, banks make money on the spread, so they borrow money and then they lend it back out. The problem with ultra low rates is that spreads are percentages typically. And so if you are borrowing at 5% and lending at 7%, that's a 2% spread. But if you're borrowing at 1, you're not lending at 3. You're lending at 1.5, all right, or 1.25, or whatever. And so one of the perversions that Ben Bernanke foisted upon the American public, and I wrote about this at the time. It was during the time of the crash when the TARP bill was originally debated. There was this one line in there, one line that gave the Fed the right to set the reserve ratio to 0. In other words, you don't have to hold any reserves. And they have always treated treasuries different than everything else. But in addition, treasuries have a 0 risk weighting, which means that a bank can take whatever it thinks is prudent, buy the bonds, post them as collateral, buy another set of bonds, post those as collateral, buy another set of bonds, and they don't have to hold back anything in reserves. Now, normally when banks do this kind of term, historically it's been 10% that they've had to hold back. And so this was essentially a declining balance thing, and you ended up with a maximum leverage ratio of a little less than 10-1. That's no longer true. That has slowly been eroded, and the TARP bill allowed the Federal Reserve to make that number 0, which of course is an infinite amount of leverage because you can turn that crank as many times as you want. What has happened in the marketplace with these ultra-low rates over this length of time is that the primary dealers have used these things as essentially an asset base, which is fine, except that they keep turning the crank. That's how they're making their money, because you have to make money somehow as a company, right? And as the percentage spread has stayed the same, but the base percentage has gone down, the amount of money they can make by doing this goes down, and it gets essentially to nowhere when you get down to it. There's nothing coming in that way. It's not enough to pay the salaries. And so you start looking for other things. So therefore, all the securitization, all of that. And this is what made all these banks so profitable during these times. It's why we have banks putting up good earnings numbers. But there's a terrible risk embedded in this, because if you have a stable asset price, in other words, the interest rate, therefore the price of a bond in today's dollars remains the same. You can play this game and you can harvest the coupons. But if there's volatility in that market for any reason, and it goes the wrong way. And remember, zero is a lower boundary, all right? The only thing you have below zero is the speculative bet that the rates will go down even more, and therefore you'll be able to sell it off to somebody else because there's a guaranteed capital loss built into all bonds that have negative rates. I mean, that's just basic logic, okay? Everybody understands math, right? I hope. Well, maybe not in this country. It's why we're where we are. So you have the Federal Reserve essentially being shoved into the position that Japan was shoved into. And rather than tell all these people to go stick it up their butts, we just, no big deal, no big deal. Trump, of course, doesn't care. Congress doesn't care. Congress is more concerned about politically motivated bullshit and impeachment. They could care less. They haven't cared, though, since the days of Barack Obama, when the so-called crusader Ron Paul was, oh boy, we got to have a gold standard. We have to audit the Fed. Yeah, we got to audit the Fed. Well, when all of this BS started, I faxed all of the members of Congress. Had a petition system up on my site, on the market ticker. You could go there. You could sign it. It would figure out your district. You put in your district number and make sure that it's right and everything, and it would fax your representatives and your senators. And there were several petitions that I sent. Well, one of them was to cut the bullshit and particularly to cut the crap about the Fed not only violating its mandate for stable prices, but in addition to that, buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities from Fannie and Freddie, which it was not legally allowed to do under the statutes and the black letter on the front of the prospectuses. Because the black letter on the front of the prospectuses said they are not backed by the federal government, which is the requirement for them to be able to do it. Well, nobody cared. No, nobody did anything. Nobody cared. And then I got this nasty phone call from Ron Paul's office telling me to stop faxing him, even though I wasn't the one sending the petitions. So we got a little problem here, because what happens when the banks get stuffed full of these treasuries and can't take any more of them without these repos? Well, the Fed either ends up owning all of it and continuing to print out these repo funds at an exponentially increasing rate, or the government has to stop spending a deficit. Now, there's a hard wall facing us in 2024, folks, with regards to Medicare and Medicaid, but there is every possibility that we don't get anywhere near there, that this repo madness and the stuff with the treasuries hits us first. And when it comes, if that is the triggering point, you're not going to get any warning on this. I don't know where it is, but at that point, you destabilize the bond market, which underpins everything else in the asset markets, folks. Rates skyrocket when that happens. Real rates, okay? Not the BS that the Fed wants to pretend. They lose control of the curve. What would be their alternative? To own everything. Well, they can't own everything. They can't buy stocks. They would need a change in the law. And while they have shaved it with Fannie and Freddie, they'll never get away with it with equities and things like that. So, folks, we ought to be having this conversation. Okay, 8% escalations still in Medicare and Medicaid. Nothing being done to actually take on the medical industry, which is where the entire problem is. And we have to fix this. We have to fix it now. So stop talking about Orange Man bad or Orange Man good, Pelosi bad. Start focusing on what's going to come and screw your personal financial life. And soon. I mean, ticker guy. Facts are facts.